We're back with Michael Friedman, the Director of Coaching Services for Real Estate Inner Circle. I'm John Alexandrov, the CEO of Real Estate Inner Circle. Michael, we've been talking about the 6 income-producing activities in the real estate industry and the real estate-related industries today. Of course, it's the 7th for some people, which is recruiting.
Correct.
But we've really been focusing on the top 6, which is lead generation, lead follow-up, going on listing appointments and taking listings, well-qualified or well-priced listings, listings that are priced to sell, I think we'd call them, working with qualified buyers only, negotiating contracts and agreements, and of course getting price improvements to make sure that we're properly pricing existing listings to make sure we get them sold. And we did cover lead generation and the basics of lead generation. We talked about scheduling and the necessity for some discipline and personal accountability and being on the success track. Now I want to talk about something I think that you're really a real expert at, and that is properly determining whether or not we should even be working with a seller or a buyer, whether or not they really meet the profile of somebody that we should be working with, because we're in business.
Sure.
And we're in business to make money as well as help other people. And there are a lot of clients, I think, that many agents are working with throughout the world, either buyers or sellers, that simply aren't qualified, and it's costing us a lot of money as agents to be working with them. So first, let's talk about the qualifying a seller, Michael, because many of us are working the sales side of the business. We're out there attempting to get well-priced listings to get into our listing inventory, but we shouldn't be taking every listing, first of all. So what are some of the ways that you recommend, in generalities now,
sure,
that we start working with sellers, and what are some of the questions or some of the ways we should determine whether or not they're even qualified to work with us or we want to work with them?
Well, John, you bring up some really great points, and I think the one thing we have to all understand is that in this qualifying process, which is very challenging for many real estate professionals, and I think the key thing, let me start by saying this, is that up front, a lot of them don't do this because they're afraid that if they actually qualify them, and I used to call it the disqualifying process,
Sure.
that if they actually qualify them, they might find out that this person, they shouldn't be working with them, and then guess what? They don't have a lead. So now how can I go back to my broker, manager, team leader and say to them, you know what, I'm prospecting, but I don't have any leads. So I think the key thing up front is understanding that the qualifying process is absolutely critical. Now, with that being said, there are some things we have to do, and that's following a script, John, a qualifying script. And we've got some great ones. And I think the key thing is following that script and asking very powerful questions that leads us to a conclusion to whether or not we, as the real estate professional, are going to choose to work with that seller.
Michael, we don't have time to go into a bunch of scripts right now. I think we have the best scripts available in industry today, bar none. But there's one that you've used, and you and I have role-played occasionally in front of audiences and on coaching calls about whether it's the money or the move. Mm-hmm. So let's kind of use that to show people how we might assist them in better qualifying sellers.
Well, John, if I was asking a seller at this point in the question process of whether or not I was going to even go out and sit down and talk with them...
I mean, you might not even go out to somebody's home and sit down and talk with them?
No, absolutely not. No, absolutely not. So one of the questions I'd ask is, John, do you absolutely need to move?
I do, Michael, yes.
Great, great. And let me ask you another question, John. You mentioned you're moving to the Hartford area. Great.
Yes.
So you absolutely need to move. Are you willing to do whatever it takes to get your home sold?
Well, Michael, I don't know, it depends on what you mean by whatever it takes, because I could drive to Hartford in an hour and a half or 2 hours a day, so I'm not so sure if I'm really willing to do it. If I have to lose a lot of money selling my house, I'm not so sure I want to do that.
Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second then, John. Let me ask you a question. Today, on December the 4th, what's most important to you? Is it the actual physical move to Hartford, or is it the money you make on the sale of your home?
For me, it's the money that I make on the sale.
So it's the money aspect of what you actually make. So folks, here's where we're going with this. If I understand that John's real driving force is that it's the money, and I know that today he'd like to list his home at $340, but knowing the market, he might only get $300 for it, I might have to be brutally honest and say some things to John based on that and what he said to me, which would be, I don't have a problem driving an hour to Hartford.
Right.
If those numbers run that way, why are we even going out trying to sit down with a client and get them to list their home with us?
But as you said earlier, Michael, and we understand the emotional reasons for this. As you said earlier, many agents, regardless of how the seller responded to that, would still take the listing, and they'd take it at whatever the price that the seller wants to list that property for, right?
Well, first of all, John, they wouldn't ask that question. Secondly, they'd say, oh, okay, no problem. the CMA would come back at 300, they'd share that information with the seller would just say to them, well, no, I told you I need to be at 340, and the realtor would say, okay, no problem, I'll take it at 340, and lose money every time.